Were ancient Irish places known to famous people in history? Well, Daithí Agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. I'm Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and this is a question that I have been pondering around myself. I recently taught a class about the origins of Druids and where it all comes from over at the Irish Pagan School, and it really got me thinking about the sources for that. So we have conversations from Pliny, known as Pliny the Elder, one of the a notable name in Greek history. We also have records from Julius Caesar, who may not meet the best resource, but he did do a lot of writing. And so, though we know his perspectives was biased, he still documented some interesting things. Now, when we take that and apply it to the Irish context, and a lot of people in paganism have concerns about the fact that some of our oldest information and lore was written down by early Christian monks. It's still great that we have these resources, and it's clear to see where the biases are on occasion. But it got me wondering, how well known were places and locations in Ireland to people outside of Ireland? And so I went on a bit of a pondering, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to pick a place to see if I can figure out where we can trace it back. And the one that has been sitting very prominently on my mind is a place up in Donegal called Grianán Aileach. And Grianán Aileach is known as a very famously, in the mythological sense, as a fortress built by the Dagda on that location over the grave of his son Aed, who was killed by a Connacht warrior called Corgran. And the judgment when Dagda was king in Ireland for Corgran wasn't that he would be killed because he killed his son. It was that he was to carry the body of his son until he found a fit place to bury him and a stone slab to fit him under. And so the story goes that Corcoran carried the body around all of Ireland, and it was in Donegal at the very top when he came to this place on the rise of a hill, and there on there he saw a stone. Now, in one version of the story, he carries the body and the stone back to the Dagda, who's king ruling in Uisneach. In another version, he buries Aed right there underneath the stone, and then he dies himself for the strain that the work put upon him in order to redeem himself and to face up to the punishment that was given to him by the then king in Ireland. So Grianán is a fascinating place, the place I have yet to visit, but it's a very real physical place. It's easy to kind of look it up. You can actually find it out there, and we know from the history of the information that it was reconstructed. The current kind of walls that were there were reconstructed, but that was done to support what was already recorded and documented there. Much like the passage time at Newgrange, the internal elements of it were maintained, of course, as they have always been, but the externals were reconstructed to the best of their ability, going from the older information to have it preserved by the National Monument Service of Ireland. So, looking at this ring fort, because it is a ring fort, it's one of the very few still standing stone ring forts, which has been documented down through the years. Um, the fort is believed to have been built, historically believed to have been built by the Northern Neil, which was one of the O'Neill family tribes. The Northern Neil was a big tribe in the north of the Ireland, and they constructed this ring fort, the stone ring fort there between the 6th and the 7th century. So we can actually date the structure itself to the 6th and the 7th century common era. But the information and the knowledge about that is also where we're looking. So when we go and try and find out the information of how do we get the mythology to sit on top of this physical history, well, that was documented in a book known as the Great Book of Lecan. So this is where the monastic information comes in. The Great Book of Lecan was documented and created with vellum illuminated manuscripts in all of that process between 1397 and 1438 Common Era, in a place called Lecan, in this monastery in that fort area. What's interesting about it is we actually have the names of the scribes who were involved in it, in the writing of this. So there were three guys. There was Éamh O'Kiernan, there was Mercada Cúntlis, and then there was an anonymous third scribe. So they can check this by checking the handwriting. They literally have linguists going over and they can see where handwriting has changed because it wouldn't be just one person laboriously doing it. The pages will all be separated out and there'll be a number of people doing this work, all of which falls under the very famous individual Gilla Isa Mór MacFervishe, who is another notable name from that medieval period, because it is because of his work that we have one of the complete tellings, one of the complete recensions of the Tombo Cúailnge. So it's big names, it's big people documenting the poetry of the time, because that's what is actually recorded in this. It is a poem expressing that mythological story about the son of the Dagda being slain and being buried there. And so we have the physical manifestation on the place from 700 AD with the Northern Aeneas. We have this medieval manuscript written in Middle Irish, which documents the mythology about it as it was relayed to the people documenting this all down. What's even more interesting, though, chasing this all back as I've been running around on it, is it was known outside of Ireland. The location is documented by a very notable figure in history from outside of Ireland. So, neat answer, not hard to say. Yes, we can say that these famous places on the island were known by people outside of Ireland, because Ptolemy was a very, if you even just look up his name, it's spelled Ptolmy. He was an Alexandrian mathematician, musical theorist, astrologer, geographer. The guy was literally a multi-threat when it came to knowledge and learning and documenting stuff. We still now have manuscripts written from him, which helps define our modern understandings of science and mathematics. So Ptolemy is an amazingly famous name. When I actually saw his name myself going through it, I was like, I fucking know who Ptolemy is without having to go doing digging around too much. So Ptolemy actually, in one of his geographies, documented Ireland, and he documented a number of places on it, but Grianán Aileach is one of the few places which is accurately depicted on his geographies of the island, in that it is in that area in the northern Donegal, what we know now as Donegal, on the island. And he lists it as a royal site. He lists it as linking to royal lineage. So it is absolutely fascinating to be able to take these landmarks of Ireland, to go in and look at the mythology, but then also couple it with the histories and understand that as much as we have this view of the small island on the edge of the world, way back when Ptolemy was alive, which is I wrote this part down to be sure, because yeah, it's circa 100 to 170 AD. So we know the history of the Northern Aeneal making a fortress there, 700 Common Era. But Ptolemy, this great Greek person, wrote his geographies between, like, born and lived between 100 to 170 Common Era, and he made a map which showed this royal site in its location of Ireland. So the mythology that we have speaks about Grianán Aileach, speaks about the Dagda coming to the grave of his son being buried there on this hill, and the Dagda making a fortress there to honor the death of his son, and the penance really, or the restitution that was done by Corcoran in finding and burying him properly. And so the fortress of Grianán Aileach, though the one that stands now, is attributed to 700 Common Era, and then the restorations that were done on it in more modern times, way back as far as somewhere between 100 and 170 Common Era. Ptolemy was actually writing about that place and knew where it was, which is absolutely mind blowing. So one of the last elements to kind of pull into this story is the understanding of local knowledge and common knowledge and story about these places and the significance of these places. In our Irish lore, we have sections known as the Dinhenicus, which is the lore of names and places. There are entire lists and glossaries and stories that are only about the name of this hill is this because that happened there. The name of this place is over here. The name of this lake is this because that's what happened there, because that's how our culture maintained its knowledge, maintained its history and its memory, by documenting those stories initially orally and passing them down so that they would be remembered. But then when it hits the time of print and writing, when we get into the Middle Irish medieval manuscripts, it was written down in that context from there, even though, again, we have a Greek lad long before that documenting it as well. So the landscape of Ireland has been recorded for a very, very long time. But one of the most interesting parts of Grianán Aileach, as I said, I was doing it's a place I'm gonna have to go. I personally haven't been at the times that I'm recording this, and I really feel that I need to get there sooner rather than later. Um, because it is linked with the Dagda, it's linked with his family. The roots of it beneath the Neil fortress are supposed to connect back to there are mythological time frames when Dagda was king in Ireland. And that is the guy I work for spiritually. That is the someone who I'm very inspired by and is my my topic of special interest, shall we say. But there's another element to this story found in ducas.ie. And this is where I'll wrap it off with you. Is Ducas.ie under the National Folklore Collection or the School Collection was a project that was done with the Education Board in Ireland and also the National Monument Service survey. And pretty much it was a whole lot of school kids, 5,000 school kids, I believe, were sent home. Wait, no, it was 5,000 schools, which made it 50,000 school kids, were sent home to write down and to document stories of their local area told by their elderly in their community. So it's go talk to your granny or granddad, go talk to like, any old person living in your town, living on your street, and write down the stories about that locality. That then became this amazing, amazing resource of memory, of written memory. In the same time that we have these ancient Book of Lecan, Book of Leinster, all of these kind of stuff, these medieval manuscripts from another perspective of documenting and recording the stories of our history and our culture. Ducas.ie is a huge, huge that's I'm sorry, I am emotional about it. The effort put in and the foresight put in to record and document all of that information is honoring that ancient process of keeping those stories alive and keeping them there. So I have a link, I'll put it in the description so you'll be able to kind of pull it up if you want to read a particular story about Grianán Aileach, which is from Donegal. The collector was a person called Kathleen McFadden in Castlecooly. So they went home with a school book, a copybook, and they wrote down a story that was told to them about Grianán Aileach. And so it's a couple of pages written in, and you can see the print in written in their handwriting and then transcribed. So it talks about that mythological history. It talks about the fact that up on that hill there's the Fort Grianán Aileach. It was made by the Dagda for the Dagda son. It tells that story from a poem that had been documented in the Middle Irish the in and around the 13 and 1400s, which is then, and even that, then the Book of Lecan collected and retranscribed sources from even older sources, which we know, like the Book of Leinster, as I mentioned, and the Dinhianicus, the Banhianicus, the Book of Invasions, Laoch Bala era. All of this content was put into this. So it's carrying that information on. But there was an extra part to the folklore, which I really fucking love, because the story goes on. It explains about Aed being slain. It explains about Corgan coming and his restitution he makes by giving up his life after finding a suitable grave for the Dagda's son. But the story continues, and this is where we get a little bit of local lore and knowledge, which is absolutely fascinating because I had never heard this before until I'd actually read about it today. Um, it says that there was a man once who ran up that hill at night, fleeing from soldiers who were chasing him. It says he went into the fort, and the soldiers came after him, seeing him go into this darkened fort atop the hill, and they couldn't find him. They couldn't find him inside the fort because it was all darkness. And as the man was going up, he saw a force of soldiers and warriors atop the hill in the fortress. And so he was afraid between this moment of like, I'm being chased by soldiers behind me, the soldiers ahead. He runs into the fortress anyway. And then the soldiers who chase after him and come into the fort can't find him, and they find it empty. They find no one in this fort. The story goes back to this man who had been fleeing from the soldiers, and he's going around feeling his way in the dark of this fort, and then he begins to see light. And he goes down and he goes down, following the light until he comes into this big, huge hall. And in the hall is a throne, and sitting on the throne is a king who is asleep. And beside the king on both sides is a bard on each side who is also asleep. And all around this hall, there are 5,000 warriors and riders. All of them are asleep. And the story continues that this man calls out to the king and says, "Arise and wake up, for Ireland is invaded. The English are here." At which point the king opens his eyes, looks at the man and goes, "It is not yet our time." And he goes back to sleep. This man then gets up and he leaves the fortress, finding his way back out. And as he comes out of the fortress, it's no longer nighttime when he went in, it's now daytime. And the soldiers are gone and nowhere to be seen. The story carries on a bit further, though, and this is something that I will probably keep looking into because it says that those warriors who rest and sleep beneath Grianán Aileach are waiting. They're waiting for the right time. They're waiting for the right notice when a woman will come and light four fires, one to the north, the south, the east, and the west around a particular lake. And then from there, she will come with a horn to Grianán Aileach and she will summon forth the king and his 5,000 riders, and they will come out in a gallop all across the island of Ireland. And when they return back to Grianán Aileach, there will not be an English soldier left on the island. Now, it's a lovely, fascinating, romanticized tale. It gives us an indication of where the mindset was around people documenting that folklore and that knowledge and that story. That this place, which had always been recognized as a seat of kingship from the very earliest of times in 100 to 170 Common Era by Ptolemy, no less, had always been associated with kingship, had been like built and supported by the Northern Enil as a seat of their kingship in that kingdom area known as Aileach. It carried its name from the Grianán, from the fort. But then it shows that when Ireland was under oppression from English rule, the folklore did change and people were connecting with these older sites. People were seeking the knowledge or the security or the powers that lived beneath these older sites to support them and to help them. And so, yeah, there are so many pieces of amazing lore and mythology out there. There's so many fantastic stories about power sleeping and waiting in the land to be called in the right way. I'm inspired and amazed and fascinated that such a story now links with Grianán Aileach and with the Dagda, the god that I work for. So, a little bit of a rambly one. Hopefully, this has been interesting for you. Hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, to answer that question, yes, the nature of Ireland, the physical locations of Ireland, were known by famous people outside of Ireland. Ptolemy fucking did his geographies and included the location of Grianán Aileach on his maps in the right area. If you'd like to know more, if you'd like to explore more about this, consider popping over to irishpagan.school/free. We have a year's worth of free resources there. If you're to do one a week or something like that at all, there's classes, courses, there's more videos to go through, book recommendations for your reading. There's a whole lot of stuff that we want to support and engage with. And until next time, look after yourself, take care. Agus slán. Goodbye.